Thank you, recording voice lady. Okay. I'm going to look in the chat and see who's all here. This is awesome. We got folks here, Florida, Virginia, West Coast, East Coast, Israel, DC area, Philly, Massachusetts. Yay, Presbyterians represent. Excellent. Welcome, Kathy. My next goal, and Steve's here. All right, we got some non-Jews here. We got some Christian folks. That's awesome. My next task is to get this more into the Christian world. So I'm really glad some of y'all are here. It's awesome. Awesome. So I am going to say a Shechianu blessing. In Jewish tradition, we say a blessing, this blessing when we arrive at a moment. So the book's been out now for 3 months, but I think this is the first time I'm going to be teaching other people how to teach it. So that feels very momentous to me because the goal of the last 10 years was to get this out in the world. So I'm going to say the Shechianu and then start. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ruach ha'olam, Shechianu v'kiyamanu v'higyanu l'azman hazeh. Blessed is the source of life, Makor Mayim Chaim, the fount of living waters that has kept us alive and sustained us and brought us to this moment. So it's really nice to see everybody's face. So this is how I'm thinking that this little hour is going to work. I'm going to spend the next 25 minutes or so, maybe less, just sort of sharing with you how I've taught this material for the last 10 years and show you some resources I've made for you that I will hopefully be adding to. And then I'm hoping we'll have ideally half an hour, at least 25 minutes for questions, thinking together. I didn't ever have a book to teach from, so I was always teaching it from the original text, and I'm giving you guys access to some of those worksheets, but the book itself obviously is a resource. So I want to think together with you. And I have only taught this in Jewish settings. So for our Christian colleagues also, maybe help you guys think about ways that you might bring Christian tradition and New Testament and other resources in. So I'm going to put in the chat a link to a Google folder in which I've put a lot of resources, and I'm giving you view access because I don't want anyone to change anything in these, but my hope is you can either make copies of the documents or download them and then play with them. But as we go through this, and I'll show you guys what it looks like. Please let me know if you can't. It's a folder called Teaching God is Here, and there are subfolders in it for each of the metaphors. Tell me if there's any problem getting into those. I'm hoping I don't have to make separate shares for each of those subfolders, but if I do, I will. So let me just begin by sort of saying what I've found in my teaching of this, how to begin. And the beginning is really the first 2 chapters of the book, but it's, oh, thanks, Ruchi, that's great. The first 2 chapters of the book are really the premise. And the premise is, I think, asking a lot of our folks, because especially for the more skeptical of the God, people who are already like into God and are excited about learning new ways to relate to the divine, no problem. Then what we're just handing them is a big, jelly bean jar full of lots of fun colors. But for a lot of my folks I know, and probably a lot of maybe some of the folks you all work with, there's this previous barrier, which is this whole God thing is suspect, and I don't know if God exists, or I totally know God doesn't exist, however, wherever they're coming from. And you're just trying to pull the wool over my eyes here. Like that's sort of a response that I get sometimes. And so I think the first thing in teaching the book is really inviting people, challenging people to really shift the frame out of this debate, does God exist or not, which has been the frame in the Western world for the last 2,000 years, basically, in the world of philosophy and in the world of religion, to there is a realm of human experience of the sacred, just like there's realms of human experience of many things in the universe. There's human experience of other humans, there is human experience of the earth, there is human experience of time, there is human experience of love, i.e. human experience of things that exist. And the only way we can really get at that experience is through metaphor. So we're not debating whether God exists or not. We're saying there appears to be something in the universe that humans have connected to forever, since we've been human, as far as we can tell. And the premise of the book is that the ancients who wrote the Hebrew Bible and other ancient texts from different traditions had many powerful ways to access that. And I've used a couple analogies. One is a menu, another is a palette. I like the palette because I feel like our palette's gotten a little monochromatic in the Abrahamic religions and in the Western world, and certainly in Judaism. But there was this rich palette, and it's still there. It's right there, but we're not activating it. So to do that, you have to introduce people a little bit to cognitive linguistics. I am not in any way an expert in cognitive linguistics, but I think I know enough about it and have shared enough in the book that you can start there. I'm just going to share a sheet that's in the Why Metaphor folder, just to show you some resources that these are texts that are not in the book, but that you might want to use and share with people. I just want to walk through them real quickly. For the Reconstructionists in the house, I had to bring some Kaplan. So Mordecai Kaplan was a 20th century American Jewish thinker, one of the preeminent 20th century American Jewish thinkers. In his Future of the American Jew, which was written in the 40s, he offers this little paragraph that I find really useful. And he distinguishes between what he calls belief in God and conception of God. But when he says belief, he's really talking about experience, and I underline that. And he talks about belief or as an intuitive experience upon which all humans have, and then how particular conception of God is a cultural formulation. I find this a useful frame to sort of point out that often when we're having arguments, we're in the realm of concept, but that we don't challenge one another's experience. When someone says, I had a godly moment or I had a sacred moment, we're not going to tell them that it doesn't exist, right? That's their experience. So I find this quote helpful. There's more from Barbara J. King in that folder, but this book is fabulous. It's called Evolving God, A Provocative View on the Origins of Religion. Barbara J. King is a prehistoric anthropologist, meaning she does anthropology of prehistory humans and anthropoids, and has really interesting ideas about where religion comes from. So I really recommend the book. A few excerpts here. Again, there's more excerpts in a document in the Why Metaphor folder, in that Google folder I gave you. The other thing on this sheet, again, this is if you want to go a little deeper into this with your folks, are some quotes from some of the books I do mention in the first chapters. One is a little quote from James Geary, Eyes and Other. I would say if you want to personally, just a really easy to read introduction to cognitive linguistics, get this book, Eyes and Other. It's very readable. It's and it updates Lakoff and Johnson and brings in neuroscience. It's quite useful. And then I bring some texts from George Lakoff and Mark Johnson. A little bit of this I quote in the opening chapters. This is more Metaphors We Live By is their foundational text. The more recent one was 1999, Philosophy in the Flesh. It's dense. They basically sort of disassemble all Western philosophy and then are left with metaphor. But if you're interested, go for that one. Finally, Sally McFaig is a Christian theologian who has some wonderful writing about metaphor and models. So I just bring a few texts from her that might be useful, either in a Jewish and or Christian setting. And finally, this is a great article by our Reconstructionist colleague, David Stein, called, it's called On Beyond Gender, Representation of God in the Torah, but he has some really wonderful stuff about metaphor in here. So that's the final text. So these are just some texts, again, that if you want to go a little deeper with your folks, you have this sheet in that folder. But I would say as you're teaching the metaphor piece, these are the things that I think you really want to, actually, I wanted to show one more thing on that sheet. Sorry. The last thing I want to show you is how metaphor works. This is the last page. This is really important. And I don't go into this detail in the book, so I want to go over it with you. In cognitive linguistics, when they talk about metaphor and conceptual metaphor specifically, there's what's called the source domain and the target domain. The target domain is the experience, the realm of human experience that we're trying to access, that we need metaphor to both talk, not just talk about, but actually experience and sort of wrap our minds around. So that's the target domain. And these are all abstract. They're not definable, in one clear way. So anger, ideas, time are the ones that I give examples here. Obviously, God is one that I look at, but there's many more. And these are examples of metaphors from Lakoff and Johnson. The source domain is the particular embodied physical experience from which the metaphor arises. And the way Lakoff and Johnson would say it is, anger is a hot liquid in a container. That's the metaphor. The target is anger, the source is hot liquid, and then we see it in our language. So anger is a hot liquid in a container. They are boiling mad. She blew her top. I need to blow off some steam. These are all in the category of what Lakoff and Johnson call metaphors we live by. We are not actively thinking metaphorically when we say these things. These are common metaphors in our culture, and we just go right to them. I love anger is a horse. It's not, if you just said, a common metaphor for anger is a horse, most people would look at you like you're crazy, but here it is, unbridled anger. He couldn't rein in his temper. Here are some ways you can harness your anger. And then there's many, many source domains for ideas, food, people, plants, cutting instruments, commodities. Again, some examples. And this is important for two reasons. One is that this idea that our metaphors always come from embodied experience, but also that different metaphors lift up different aspects of the experience. So like for anger is a hot liquid in a container, really, sort of draws on this uncontainable experience of anger, like when we just feel like something's building in us and is going to explode. Whereas anger in a horse suggests that anger is something that can be channeled or harnessed, right? Or reined in. So it becomes something we can guide and actually ride, right? So the idea of anger is something that's going to explode us versus something we can ride is quite different. And neither is a definition of anger, right? So again, the way the linguists write it is anger is a hot liquid in a container and anger is a horse, but of course anger is neither hot liquid or a horse. But when we're in the metaphor, we're actually in it. And so it's not a definition. And that's really important when we get to the metaphors for God. These are not definitions, but when we're in the metaphor, it is shaping our experience of that thing. So I think, let me see, Mimi's got a question. Mimi's question. When you teach this material, do you tend to give the metaphor stuff over more lecture style, or do you have people discuss the metaphor text? Mimi, it totally depends on how much time I have. When I taught this, originally I taught it as a series of 5 to 6 week classes. And yeah, we'd spend a good half hour or 45 minutes on the metaphor stuff and let people look at it. I've been doing a lot of webinars for like an hour and a half. I mostly just walk people through it. But again, you have the book, so you've got a couple chapters that deal with this. And then if you like people to look at more texts, it's really up to you and what you think your folks want. I do think it helps them to be grounded, and I try to explain it pretty clearly in the book. So it's really up to you, but I think it's important for you all to understand it. And maybe you find some of those texts provocative or fun. The Barbara J. King stuff is really cool. I would highly recommend if you have time to share some of that. Let me say one more thing about one more piece of this, and then I want to open it up. So that's number one. Feel yourself sort of grounded in how this metaphor stuff works, and then share that to some extent with your people and try to answer some of their questions, and also let them know that they're going to be experiencing this. But the thing about metaphors, I'll say it again, it's not a definition. For conceptual metaphors, for big things in our lives, we have to have more than one. I never teach just one metaphor. Because different metaphors lift up different parts of the experience. And no one metaphor can get at all aspects of the experience. And I think that's really important, because when it comes to God, the God is a big person metaphor was being asked to do way too much, right? God as a big person was being asked to handle the creative power of the universe and a source of love, and try to answer the question, try to deal with really terrible things happening to people, for which the God is a big person metaphor, I think, is particularly terrible. It just makes more problems. And no one metaphor can do that. So water can't do all of it, fire can't do all of it, rock can't do all of it, right? They all speak to different aspects of our experience. So we need a lot of them. And that's why I have a lot of them in the book. So we need lots of metaphors. We need to the based in physical experiences is important, as I'm going to talk about in a moment, because we have to get back into our bodies and back into physically experiencing. And these are not definitions. So those are like the 3 big takeaways I would say I want you to have. So yeah, so after you've laid that groundwork, then you get to like dive into the metaphors. And this is the fun part. I'm going to tell you what I did before I had the book. I've never taught with the book. So, I mean, I'm just starting to teach with the book. So we have to think about how to do this together. I have found, so maybe you're going to teach a class and you're going to choose 3 of the metaphors. I don't know. I think I would suggest you start, before you get into the God part, you just start with the thing. So for example, I've gotten people in small groups and just say, brainstorm every quality associated with water you can think of. And then they just brainstorm lots of qualities of water. This is helpful in a few ways. One is just gets people thinking about their experience of water. I will guarantee you that in those lists of adjectives that they will come up with, there will both be positive aspects of water as well as destructive and scary aspects of water, which is really important when we're talking about the divine. But again, it just sort of grounds people in that. So you can do it for fire, you can do it for rock, you can do it for water, but just inviting people to really brainstorm. I've done it with kids by printing out different pictures, like I have like different pictures of water. There are some pictures in the folders, and then had the kids write on the pictures like what qualities. You could do that with grown-ups too. But again, just getting them to connect to the actual thing, water. I think here in the Northeast, we don't think about water that much. If you're zooming in from a drier part of the country or the world, people I think are much more sensitive to the preciousness of water. So sometimes here on the East Coast, where we tend to get a lot of rain, I find we have to like really lift that up. And then what I'll do is then go to texts. And I think, I mean, I bring a lot of texts in the book. I have thousands of texts. So I've made text sheets for you all. You can make your own. I'm going to share them with you. I think it's fun to let people wrestle with the texts themselves a bit, because then they can really, then they can play with it a bit themselves. So I'm going to show you one of the texts that's in the water folder. Let me share this with you after I bring it up. So for water, for example, I've done a couple things. One is, before even looking at specific verses, just looking at, like, for the people who wrote the Torah, and I am assuming that I'm going to be talking about people writing the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, that our ancestors wrote this. Water was really important. They live in a semi-arid region of the world. And in each of the books of the first 5 books of the Bible, of the Hebrew Bible, which are also the first 5 books of the Christian Bible, water plays a really big role. So this is in this document, which you have access to, I just summarized sort of some of the connections to water. So clearly water is very big in the creation story. And then in the stories of the matriarchs and patriarchs, water is linked to well-being, welcoming, survival. Water in Exodus is fascinating, from Moses being placed in the Nile to the birth imagery of the Israelites escaping through the birth canal of the Sea of Reeds, the Israelites complaining in the wilderness about water. In the book of Leviticus, water is central to the priestly rituals, enabling spiritual transformation from impurity to a state of ritual purity. Deuteronomy has very interesting connection to water. This I do go into more detail in the water chapter in the book. That water is connected both to blessing and the maintaining of the covenant with the divine. So that's just sort of some background, and then some ways that it comes up in connected to the covenant, how it comes up in prophetic texts, when there is water and when there's not water. Let's see, some other water, and then I've got another document. Please tell me. Let's see. Can someone tell me, did the text shift? Is it a new text? Yes, good, great. Okay, so God is water text. These are the ones, again, I gave you a lot. These are where, so these are ones where God is either directly referenced as water or where there's important points to be made, but a bunch of these talk about God making it rain, or actually having God names. I mean, what are names for the divine, mostly from prophets and some from Psalms. This idea that I talk about in the book of justice being like a liquid and God raining down justice. So anyway, these are just texts with the English and the Hebrew of some of the ones that I quote in the book, but even more that you all can use. And then this notion of drinking God, drinking from the river of God. So this is a whole bunch of texts. And again, I find it can be nice to give folks some or all of the texts and then let them do a little study on their own, and then connect it back to the adjectives they came up with around it. So my premise for all this part of the book, my premise for the metaphor, the biblical and ancient metaphors is that these metaphors were metaphors people lived by in the time that this was written, that these weren't poetic musings on a page, that somehow God as water, drinking in the divine, was meaningful to the people who wrote these texts, that when they said sing, when in the rock chapter, when they said sing to the rock, I don't know what they were doing, but there was some kind of practice of engaging with rocks. I'm just taking it seriously. That's all I'm doing. I'm not making anything up. It's right there in the text, and it's just going to the level of saying, let's take it seriously. So the last thing I want to say, and then really open it up, is that if we're going to do that, we have to bring the texts alive, and we have to get people engaging with them again. So there's, in the book, in every chapter, there are practices. It's really important you do the practices. You might want to try them yourself first. And some of the practices that I personally found to be work the best, one it's called Activating Torah, Hispailut, from the Musar tradition. I learned this from my colleague, David Jaffe. It's on pages 72, 73 in the book, where you take a verse and you just activate it, you study it, you talk it out loud, you sing it, but you just send people off for like 10 or 15 minutes and just spend time with this verse, saying it over and over, either in English or Hebrew or both, singing it, talking it, playing with it, but just spending time with one verse. So that can be very powerful, and you can choose any verse, but a verse about water, a verse about rock, any of the, I put it in the water chapter, but it can be done for any of the verses. So activating Torah is really powerful. One of my colleagues, who I reference a lot in the book, Rabbi Sheffa Gold, has chants on many of these. There are in the documents that you have there's a water one, there are a bunch of water ones, there's a rock one on the rock texts, and there's a Makom one. Chanting the verses in Hebrew and English, whether or not people speak Hebrew, I don't think matters, is a really powerful way of bringing this alive. And again, maybe you have chants from other places, other traditions that use these metaphors. It's very powerful. You need to do it for a while, at least 10 minutes of chanting, and then sitting with that. And finally, I would say really encouraging people to use these different names in their prayer practice. If they have a prayer practice, let them do that. If they don't, then you have to help create a prayer practice for them. I described the Hasidic practice of Hitbodedut beginning on page 114. And that is going and just having a conversation with God. And the main thing is that you set a timer, you set a time, at least 10 minutes, ideally 20, ideally an hour, but 10 to 20. And there are, in the Teaching God folder, there's sheets of names, and you invite people to use some of the different names. So maybe you're teaching the rock and they go off and they talk about rock, or they use water, or they just pick a name from the sheet. There's many, many names. But as they're speaking, they say those names, just see what it feels like to address the divine, whether they think anything's out there or not, doesn't matter. So that's one thing to do, is to really activate the texts through speaking them, through praying them, through chanting them. But it's really important, I think, between classes, to whatever metaphor you're going into, have them do a practice, whether it's in the book or something you make up. I mean, I just made all this shit up. So I totally empower you guys to make stuff up. That just go pay attention to water. Like when you're washing your hands this week, when you're drinking, pay attention. When it rains, go stand in the rain. One class when we were doing rock, I just went out in the parking lot of my synagogue, which meets in a church, and found rocks, and I gave one to everybody. I was like, you must carry this rock around for the week, and just have them carry the rocks around. Notice clouds every day, but just really invite them. These are mostly from the world of nature. It's such a beautiful invitation. And then after they've been noticing, maybe to do some journaling, some reflection. To do that, let me see, Steve, your practices and suggestions in the last part of each chapter are so rich. Do you recommend engaging people with them all or just one? Good question. I would probably say go over them together and then have people choose one that they like, or that speaks to them. I mean, they can try all of them, and you might want to try all of them, but, and some you can do together. Like I would totally recommend chanting together, there's links to the chants, learn them. Learn one, or you can chant along with Sheffa on the website. There's audio and PDFs of the chants. Do that in class. There's a mountain pose meditation in rock. You can do that with the whole class. But for the other ones, I would say maybe go through them and then have people choose one and come back. And I want to give you an example of what happens when you do that. So this is the first year. So when I just to tell you this, I really had no idea. I gave a talk at the High Holidays. I said, okay, this metaphor stuff is really cool, and then I said, I'm going to teach a class. And like 40 people showed up, which my congregation wasn't that big at the time. It was a lot of people. I think 25 people stuck with it. And then we just started doing it. We started studying the stuff and doing the practices. And this, I'm going to tell you the story. It's not in the book. So we were doing makom, God as place, which is a rabbinic metaphor. And this woman was in the class. I did not know her. She wasn't a member of the congregation, and I've never seen her again after the class. So we did, like, I think I had people draw places that were meaningful to them and then share it with someone. And then I just sent them off that week to think about places. I can't even remember what I sent them off to do. So the next week, people come back, and this woman shared this story. So she said, I really don't believe in God. I have a real problem when we get to the prayer, the Shema, the prayer. This is the prayer from Deuteronomy. That's the center of the morning and evening service in Judaism. When we say, listen, Israel, Adonai our God, Adonai is one. She said, I get to that and I can't say it because I don't believe it. It doesn't mean anything to me. She said, but I connect very powerfully to place. So she said, so all during the service leading up to the Shema, she said, I was just thinking about places that are meaningful to me and that are powerful for me. And she said, and then when I got to the Shema, I said those words and I brought all those places together. And she said, I had an experience I had never had of the divine. And that was so fabulous because I hadn't told her to do that. Like, she had come up with that. So, so I think to trust that if you give people practices, and I was doing rock with my congregants, and one of my congregants told me that every night we were studying this text about Sur Levavi, the rock of my heart. And she said, every night I have a rock that sits next to my bed and I place it on my heart. Like, who knew? Like, people have these practices already sometimes. And then you're saying your practice not only is beautiful, but it's actually grounded, in our tradition. So the practice piece is really important. And also saying to folks who are skeptical, saying, fine, be skeptical. We're not debating this. Do the practices. Just invite them to do it. And doing some journaling, some reflection. What's not in the folder yet, and I will put up in there, is some class outlines that I've taught in the past. And you can sort of see some of the exercises I had people do, including drawing and journaling in class. When I taught rock and cloud for the first time, these photos are in there. I put pictures of rock and cloud out on the table, and I had everyone pick a picture and then either write a poem about it, a prayer to it, or a letter to it. And it was fabulous. It was very cool. Thank you for saying it's generous. I really don't feel like it's generous. I feel like this is like, like literally, if I disappear tomorrow, I would be okay because like this is out there. So you all are my emissaries now of getting out in the world, because people have told me it's changed their lives. I mean, this is really not from a place of ego. Like, I really think this is helpful. So you guys are being generous by helping get the word out. All right, I will now shut up until you ask me, and then let's just open it up. Reflections, questions, ideas that you're thinking about, and we can workshop this together a little bit.
First, hi, Toba, thank you so much. You're amazing. So let's just open with that. But I'm really excited to work with this material. Can you say a few words about your process in writing, pulling the material together, and what has been, or what are a few moments that have been transformative for you in working with the metaphors or the practices?
Thank you. So the writing the book was a little different. So there were multiple processes. So I had to do the research for when I taught it. That sort of was why I could write the book. Because before I would teach metaphor, I would go do the research, in terms of Jewish texts, and finding the text. And I have so much. I mean, I could write a whole book just on voice. I mean, I have so much material. It's sort of insane. But so that was a process of just really, for me, and it may be you're like this, like just delving into the text was really important. But then as I started writing the chapter, it was like really just living with it, so it was like, all right, like rock was not a metaphor that spoke to me particularly, but then I just started noticing it. And then I went on a trip to the Equal Justice Initiative in Alabama and started noticing like, stones being used as memorials and earth being collected from lynching sites, and going to this, I talk about this in the book, going to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and there's a huge stone there with a quote from the book of Joshua about setting up stones. And I was like, oh my God, this is really, and then I Googled gospel song, spirituals with rock in it, and saw how this was resonant in the African-American tradition. So it was like an immersion, I would guess, to use that metaphor. I mean, I think I just immersed myself in the metaphor. The other thing I did, for those of you in spiritual direction, this is really fun. Like I was sharing it with my spiritual director. She now has it. There will be a review of this in the spiritual director journal. But if you're in spiritual direction, like use it with your director, like play with it for yourself, and she would ask me what, if I would bring something, what metaphor is, what are you sitting with? So I would do it for myself. Like, okay, like something's hard right now. I'm sitting with fire, I'm sitting with like something coming out of that place of fire. So that was, I don't know if that's helpful, but it was really doing it myself as well as teach. I tend to learn when I teach. So that, and for me, again, I love research. So for me, like just amassing this material was useful. And again, I had to cut a lot of it out of the book. There was just too much. Which is why I think when you're teaching it, you can bring as much or as little as you want, depending on your people and if they like that stuff. And Jake, you asked a question I want to go about. Look, I've taught this as one-offs. I think it's very sweet what happens when people do commit, if you can get a group to commit, even if it's for 3, The other thing about not doing a one-off is I really don't want people walking away and saying, okay, now I get it. God is water. Like when you do multiple metaphors, then people get that these are, we need multiple ones. So I would encourage it to, if you're going to do a series, I would encourage it if possible. Also that way, I think it is good to do practices and then check in the next week. And if they don't come back, you can't do the check-in. Do I spend any time breaking down the Big Bang and metaphor? I think the book does that. I'm really, and I'd love to hear more from Christian colleagues for whom the person metaphor is obviously central to your theology in a way it's not in Judaism, in certain ways. What I want to point out to people is I don't try to break down the metaphor. There are human metaphors for the divine that are beautiful, and I don't want to remove any metaphors unless they're problematic. I do think God as distant tyrant is a problematic metaphor, so that one I challenge. What I try to do is when people say, well, yeah, it's a nice metaphor, but it's not really God. In that moment, I will say to them, what do you mean by it's not really God? And point out to them that in that moment, what they mean is they are in the metaphor of God as a big person. That if God doesn't act, judge, whatever, destroy, love, in the ways that they're thinking, as a human, then that's not God. So but you do need to spend some time peeling it off. And I think sometimes it's just pointing it out to people when they're in it, not judging it, but just saying, I think we're back in that metaphor again. Can we shift? And what happens when we shift? I think I deal with that directly in the part of the water chapter when I talk about suffering and my own suffering and what happens, as I was dealing with the death of my spouse, the impending death of my spouse, the question of like, why is God doing this to me? I think is a very God is a big person metaphor. We don't usually ask why the ocean is doing this to me. It's just not a question one would ask of the ocean. And when I did the chant, Kita avor b'mayim, when you pass through the waters, I am with you from Isaiah, I realized it was a completely different question. The question was, how do I navigate this? It's a totally different question. So again, it's not throwing out the God as a big person, but it's saying, if that metaphor is not helpful in this moment, then let's shift metaphors and see what happens. David Steinberg, you mentioned in passing an activity of having students write a prayer to a picture of a rock. I'm all in with the idea that God is described with all sorts of metaphors, but writing a prayer to a picture of a rock triggers a strong reaction, right? So, all right, how is this not idolatry? I think this came at the end, David, of studying the metaphors. So we'd immersed ourselves in, a non-Adonai. That's a God name in Numbers, I think. The God cloud. We had looked at, there's so much liturgical language. So I don't think it's any more idolatrous to be responding to a picture than, singing Surah Yisrael, right? The Rock of Israel. I just asked them to choose a picture to sort of, that they would be connected in their mind to an actual rock. And then using that to be expressive. So we weren't worshiping the rock. We weren't bowing down to it. We were just, again, sort of trying to make real either of these. And they didn't have to write a letter to it. Like that was just for people who were less poetic. But it could be a prayer about it. But again, we're not worshiping things. We're entering the metaphor to access an aspect of our experience. In terms of number of sessions, I've done multiple ones. I think the first time I taught it, I did 5, took a break, did another 3 or 4. If you're doing it for the year, you could space them out over the year. And again, when I was first teaching it, I was making it up as I went along, so we needed time, and people really got into it. They had a lot to say. And again, I couldn't send them home and say, read a chapter. So I didn't have that. You have that. So maybe you can do more by sending them home and asking them to read something and then coming back. Steve, since you asked about the Christian experience of human metaphors, white supremacy and patriarchy are such toxins among Christian people and institutions. Part of that is bad use of the human metaphors for divine, as well as colonial uses of Jesus. So expanding the language for God is critical for our churches and communities. That's beautiful. Thank you. Anybody else want to unmute? And yeah, I love, chat is great, but I'm also really would love to invite conversation. So if anyone else wants to unmute. Mimi, did you want to?
Toba, yeah, I have a question. So,
Yeah.
I'm like really wrestling with this metaphor, the like metaphor aspect that you taught at the beginning of the book. And I just want to make sure that I'm getting it right before I give it over, which is that if we're trying to access like the deeper sacredness in reality, that these things like our experiences and connections with rock, water, becoming, voice, that can be our access point to that deeper sacredness. And then I guess my question is, when you spend a lot of time going into the different qualities of these different metaphors, so like the different aspects of rock as redeemer, rock of my heart, is that just basically giving people like a lot of different options with which to relate to that metaphor, so that there isn't like one way to think about rock, what rock is and about? Like, is it just about increasing access points, or is there something I'm missing about like the many different qualities that you're drawing out of the metaphor?
It's definitely,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, it is that. And it's also, it's many different qualities and aspects, but it's also, I think, helping people, it's giving them something. So for example, I'm about to head off to Baltimore on Sunday to the Pearl Stone Retreat Center to work with the fellows of the Inside Out Wisdom and Action Project that David Jaffney runs. So these are Jewish social justice activists doing really intense work. So David and I were talking about which of the metaphors should I do with them, and it was not just let's have a lot. It was like, what do they need? And Dave was like, they really need rock, they really need refuge. And I was like, and I think they really need fire, because we're in a really hard time right now, and fire is about creation through destruction. So it could also be looking at your folks and saying, maybe people are just spiritually dry. Maybe what they really need is water. So it is to have different access points, but it's also like, as you read the book and as you think about the metaphors and as you think about what speaks to you, what do my folks need, right now? So I think that's part of it, because as I wrote each chapter, I had to really, like I said, rock wasn't speaking to me that much. I had to really be like, well, what is refuge? Like, what do I even mean by that? Like, I was calling people, like, tell me what you think refuge is, So sometimes we get away from the metaphor and we get more into the experience, and that's fine too. Like, maybe you end up having a whole class talking about what's refuge and what's refuge versus hiding. Like in the rock chapter, I talk about like hiding is like behaviors we take on that are just trying to like hide from reality. That's not refuge, but that can be really useful. And then maybe you come back to rock. With fire, I got, we started with fire. We looked at this notion of furnace remelting. By the way, for folks in that chapter, there's fascinating translation of Elkanah, which is usually translated as jealous God, which I think is a terrible translation. And it's a wonderful article. I put a PDF of the article in the fire folder about Kana as furnace remelting when referring to the divine. But in that, I just asked people, like, write about an experience when you like felt completely melted down, like when some aspect of your reality was completely destroyed or just, or radically changed, and then something new and hopeful came out of it. So it started with the fire, Mimi, but then it actually led them, and I have a couple quotes look, this woman wrote this amazing thing about her divorce and what that meant for her, so it wasn't like she wasn't writing about fire. She was writing about an experience, but it was an experience that I think that metaphor brought me to. So I think it's both, it's like going between our experience and the metaphor and back and forth again. Is that helpful?
Yeah, very. Thank you.
I have a question. Do you ever open up to contemporary metaphors? God is the hard drive of existence, or whatever it is, right? Like, do you go down that road at all?
Yeah, so the last chapter is GPS and electricity. But so I do that in the book, and yeah, play. I mean, I think the main thing with I think thing I've heard people, like my editor at some point said this, and I was like, not really. It's like, well, God could be anything. It's like, actually, no. Like, there are metaphors that are useful and metaphors that aren't. If people want to play with like hard drive, then I would say, what does that metaphor suggest? Like, I chose GPS and electricity because I think they actually are helpful, in thinking about my relationship to reality. But if people say, I want to think about God as X, I would invite them to do that, but then really push them like, well, then what's the nafkamina? Like what comes out of that metaphor? And does that metaphor speak to an aspect of your experience that none of these metaphors are? I mean, the earth ones are pretty basic. I mean, they're in every culture, right? The modern ones are different. And maybe, and you really lifted up, Steve, maybe there's some metaphors that are dangerous and we need to like be really careful about. And that's the other issue. And again, I don't go into human metaphors because I think there's a lot written about human metaphors, and there's certainly many beautiful human metaphors, mother, father, teacher, beloved, but there's a lot out there about that. I think again can be difficult for some of my folks at least, so I chose non-human ones, but there's certainly other ones. Let me just screen share the folder and what I've put in it, so you all can see that. And then you can spend some time playing with it a little bit. And again, I intend to add to this is what I could get together in time for this. I'm hoping to do more over the summer. You have access. I will put everything in this folder, so you should continue to have access to it. So in the Teaching God is Here folder, I have why we need metaphor. That's where I've put texts, both the text I showed you and some other texts. I've put here for each of most of the biblical metaphors, some text sheets. The fire one, I only seem to be able to find in PDF. I'm going to try to make a Word doc of that. And I don't know if the Hebrew will get messed up when you download it. I have no idea, but the Hebrew's there. And then the last three I did not put in a folder, but are just different names, sheets that have names. And cloud and rock have pictures in them also that I made. And so then if you go into any folder, you'll see a bunch of stuff. So like in water, the water names and chants are on one sheet. There's water imagery in Tanakh, and then God is water texts. In Makom, I put the text, and then I put I said to people to cut out little cards that say Manu Ra HaMakom Hazeh, how awesome is this place? So anyway, it's a sheet with little cards you can cut up. Anyway, I will try to populate this with more stuff, but just so that this is here for you. And again, hopefully you can either copy or download everything and play with it. And if you make something great and you want to upload it and add to the folder, that's awesome as well.
Have you shared this folder with us, or is there?
I did earlier. I'm going to put it in the chat again in case you didn't see it.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me do that right now. And Donna, did you have a question?
Yes, I had two of them.
Okay, go for it.
What in 2032, what do we have to look forward to in your sequel? In other words, where are you going with this? And also, where do the congregants, or those who've done this with a long time, where are they taking this? In political direction, in terms of certain issues, and look, where are they going, or where do they want you to go with it?
That's a really good question. To answer the first question, I can't think 10 years in the future. God knows there'll be a world in 10 years. But I can say that my hopeful next project is a young person's version of the book, like 5th through 7th grade, sort of around, with lots of pictures. So that's no promises, bli neder, but that's my hope. I'm putting also another link. I'm putting a link in the chat to buy the book in bulk. You can get it for much cheaper if you buy it in bulk. So just for folks who are planning on teaching a class, I would. And the other thing I was going to say is, if so, the minimum order for bulk is 25. But if you see people here who you know, or if you want me to, I can probably send out a list of registrants to everybody. If you want to share, like you could team up with some folks and get a bulk order. So anyway, so a version for youth is the next one. I've actually, I've done this in classes and people have taken it in their own individual ways. We haven't really actualized it as a community, and I think we're going to do that this year. So I'll be able to answer that question, Donna, in a year. Like, what does it mean to like sort of make this live in our community more? We haven't done that yet. I haven't done that yet. Yeah, Sophia. I mean, Ruchi.
Thanks, Toba. Have you ever deliberately taught this to teens?
I have done this with 5th and 6th graders. And I can upload some of those lesson plans. I don't know how much sort of out of context they get. I've done it with our teachers, sort of invite them to be a little more mindful of their use of God language when they're teaching. And I've done with kids, I've put pictures out, had them write like qualities of what they saw, like with the water. And then we've talked about, and I first had them like talk about God and what that word conjures for them. And then we've compared the words for water and the words for God and seen where there's overlap and not overlap. And then I've done meditations with them. I'm not in a very nature-centric place. If I was in a place where I could just take them into the woods, I would do that. I would, maybe you might have more access to that out in Oregon, but like literally like look at some of the verses and then go sit by a stream and meditate. But yeah, I have done it with kids. With kids, I sort of feel like I don't talk about metaphor so much. I just do it. My hope is I'm planting seeds and that some of these things are there. Some of these images are there for them. I'll have kids. I've with our bar mitzvah classes, I've put up different texts with all different metaphors, including like things from like Pink, life is a dance floor, God is the DJ. I put all these different metaphors around the room and then had the kids go pick one that they like the most and then do some writing about why. So I think there is ways to introduce this to kids and get them thinking about it. I can upload some of those lesson plans. Deborah, yeah.
Oh, first of all, Toba, amazing. When I bought the book, I thought this is like all of my next year. Delving into it and teaching it in all kinds of ways. One thing that I'm reminded of is, especially in maybe in some of the introductory things, but also you could apply it to each one of the metaphors, is something we used to do years ago, synectics.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And what you end up doing is you take in the beginning of it, and I have to review like how exactly you do it, but you take two seemingly completely unrelated things, and in the end, and it's a way of sparking creative thought. And in the end, you come up with, like a shared metaphor, or shared, it just is so exciting. And I'm thinking like that is, that may be an exercise or a type of exercise that, could really be used, in this. And the other thing is that I'm a visual artist, and I've been teaching for quite a while, a sort of these sessions, and then we really started doing it in earnest during the pandemic, of responding to text with expressive either art or writing. And it has touched such a chord in people, even though, or maybe Dafka, because it was the pandemic, we were doing it, we switched over, instead of doing these, like intensive art workshops, we switched over to doing this thing on Zoom. But I can envision bringing some of that into this. And I just love the possibilities of people being able to engage in this expressive kind of thing, whether writing or drawing or whatever, in relation to these metaphors. I just think it's going to touch something very deep in people. And we don't get to delve into that stuff in our, like the liturgy or whatever, you know what I mean? It's just, or we're all in our heads, people are all.
No, I totally agree. I think using art, using movement, using music, I mean, yeah, whatever you're comfortable with or is your thing, any of that could be another way to activate the text. I mean, you can talk about it, that's the Musar way, but right, maybe you activate the text by drawing it, by dancing it. I mean, yeah, I would say really, like, it's supposed to involve all of us. Fred, you had a question.
Hey, kol hakavod, and thank you. So in terms of teaching it, a couple questions. One that was in the chat. is it almost, this is exploration for you at this point, like you say, you've never taught from the book, but I'm wondering, should we try to teach it at least with an opening session or two before people read it, so that they can kind of sit with and surface their own, and then use the book as resource, or a more traditional book discussion group model where they read and then come together? That's part one. And part two is there's so many intersections with Musar that for those of us who are simultaneously teaching Musar, I wonder if there's like interest here in having a Musar and metaphor breakout group, and how we do the two together.
Yeah, and there's some Musar, for folks who aren't familiar, is a Jewish ethical practice. There are definitely Musar. I mean, David Jaffe was a big influence on the book, and there's definitely Musar techniques. I don't know how the book could relate. I mean, I can't answer that. You guys will have to answer that once you start using it, and see what works. I do think it might be, my hunch would be, but I don't know, that you might want to introduce the metaphor, do some work together, and send people home. But things, look, it's a book. So I had to bring my stories. I had to bring my connections, and that might be evocative. And people are like, oh, we like learning more about you. And that's nice, but that's not the point of the book. The point of the book is that people do this. So, but it could be that reading a story about me, helps other people. The practices are certainly in the book. But that's a good, I don't know. But I wouldn't say just may have it be a book group, because then I think it just stays in people's heads. I think it has to be a practice group. And it could be self-initiated. I don't even know it has to have a leader. I mean, people could potentially read it and then, and then come together and do the exercises. But I think the practices are really important. They're not just tacked on. They're really part of it. I'm not totally keeping up with the chat, so if people have questions or want to unmute, yeah. Bye, Steve. Thank you.
Actually, looking at the chat, what it's making me think is, thank you so much for doing this work, Toba, because I think some of our colleagues have been doing this work for kids for a long time, but haven't figured out how to do this for adults. And I think you finally figured out how to do this for adults, so that's great. Cool.
Yes, adults need to play a little more, right? We have a couple minutes left. Anybody else who hasn't spoken has a question or want to share anything? Yeah. Hi, Lydia.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing this. I found your sharing at GBIO really liberating for me as I deconstruct my faith. Getting caught up with white supremacy and patriarchy. I'm always like, which pronoun? And then when you said, oh, I just call it it because I'm talking about a rock, I was like, oh, yeah, just call it it. And when you said earlier, though, I had my congregants questions popping up behind me. When you were talking about, oh, why would God do this to me? That's staying in the person language. But I don't know, what would you say to kind of a response to that, saying oh, isn't that just convenient? Just switching the metaphor whenever, it doesn't work, that God isn't doing, I had someone comment during one of our online services in the YouTube chat, we were preaching about parenting and they're like, oh, isn't there a responsibility as a parent to do something? And, those kind of tough questions, why isn't God doing anything? And I could kind of hear the unresolvedness of someone saying, well, isn't it convenient to just switch the metaphor when
so I think what came to mind as you were speaking, Lydia, is this: there are questions I can't answer. Those are not useful questions. Why isn't God stopping this? It's that's not a question you or I or anyone can answer. How do I navigate this? I can answer that question. How do I gain strength in this moment to deal with this? That's a question I can answer. So I think I'm not trying to avoid that question. I'm saying it's not a useful question. I would also suggest, if you really want to push back, you could say that's not a question about God, that's a question about a metaphor. It may or may not be a useful question. So when I shift to the water, I say, how do I navigate this? I'm not ducking, I'm staring into the face of the abyss. I'm just saying, now I have a question I can actually work on, I think fire, I was emailing a friend after Buffalo, an African-American friend, and just sending condolences and to say, I'm thinking about you in this moment. And he's reading the book and I said, go look at fire, and he went and looked at that book, and it's, it's about that. It's about just looking at utter destruction and are dealing with our own anger and rage, and so it was to help him. It wasn't to like duck anything. It was to say, and then he said, I'm going to start praying to Elkanah, to the fire, the furnace remelting God. So to me, it's about helping folks, right? It's not about ducking. It's about saying, let's come up with some, what's useful here in this moment. Ultimately, I'm a pragmatist, I guess. I'm more of Mordecai Kaplan, William James, what's practical here? What's going to really help me and help them? If people want to ask those big questions, that's fine. They're not answerable. And I think personally, I think they're very unproductive. I think theodicy was the biggest waste of time. I mean, really, we're debating things that have no answer. Really, what a vast waste of time. Let's have questions that we have spiritual answers for, and we have something to address. Jake, you had a question. I'll give you the final word because we have to wrap up.
Okay, this might be too long of a question for the last question, but I'm thinking about the God Cafe program that Sarah Brammer-Schley put together. I'm wondering if you see potential for that program to work with the teachings from your book, or if, and maybe this is a broader question for people who have experience with both.
Yeah, I don't know God Cafe, Jake, so I have to know more about it. I haven't experienced it, but I'm open. I mean, again, this thing is just getting launched, so if people have ideas, please, let me know. I want to get it out in the world. This is one way I'm doing it, by doing these webinars for clergy and educators, but if there's other formats, it's out now. It's not attached to me anymore. It's its own thing out in the world. So anywhere it wants to go, it will go, I guess. I do want to wrap up and honor people's time. Thank you everyone so much. Again, I will keep uploading materials to that. I need to make the technological piece of this, I'm still getting on top of, but I have all your guys' emails from the Zoom. At some point I will send updates if I've uploaded more stuff. If you do something fabulous with this that works, I'll create a new folder of collaborators. I think I really want this to be shared. And I want the book needs to sell so that they keep publishing it. So buy it, have your congregants buy it. Don't just take it. I mean, library is great, but go to your local bookstore. Just really, again, I'm not doing this for money. I want it out in the world. So the more that are bought, the better it is. And then, and there'll be another run of it. So that's the other thing. So thanks everyone so much. Really so appreciate your time and interest.
Thank you.
Really fabulous. Great to see everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Amazing.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Just looking at the chat. Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you. Thanks, Fred.
Touchy. Yeah.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Enjoy Prostom. That sounds amazing. And I really am interested in the interface with Musar. And so if that comes up with David or others, or if you hear of others who want to be an affinity group around that, that Linda would join too.
Yeah. I mean, what happened with David was he was writing his book and I was writing mine, and I was reading some of his stuff. And, I said, David, I think there's an implicit theology here, but not an explicit theology. And I said, I think some of my metaphors could really help the Musar work. So when I was working on some of the chapters, I talked to him, I said, what's a practice that would be grounded in rock? What are practices that would be grounded in water? And he doesn't just do Musar, he also does the Rabbi Nachman stuff. But I have taught it with him for that reason. So it's, and it's in the book. I mean, so the Musar practices are there, and right. So I think it's, maybe it's there's the practices that are the Musar practices, but then it's coming back to the more traditional Musar and saying, is there an implicit theology here for good or for bad? And what do we think about that? The Iris Stone stuff is very much like self and other. It's very binary, it's a very different kind of theology.
Right. No, absolutely. But especially around Yira and Bitachon, which are so hard for us to wrap our heads around. That's where yours is an incredible opening. But I would make little margin notes as I was reading with all the other midot, let me use that sometime when I'm teaching Emet or Kavod or whatever.
Go for it. Musar is not my thing per se, but if you do it and you create something, like I said, I really want this to multiply. I don't feel ownership over it, so that would be cool. Yeah, it's right for bitachon, rock is bitachon, or whatever it is that you.
Right.
up with. And again, some of that's in there, but certainly not, I didn't, I tried to mix up the practices too. I was, unless you want to
Indeed.
stop the recording.